Good evening, and welcome to the June gathering of the Maine Public Book Club. I'm your host, Bill Nemitz, and joining us this evening is Marpheen Chann, author of Moon in Full, a modern coming-of-age story. This is an extraordinary piece of work by Marpheen, who in his 33 years has had an extraordinary life here in Maine. He's bridged the two Maines like few people I've ever seen in all my time here. There's lots to talk about tonight. But before we get started, I do want to thank Bull Moose and Coffee by Design for their generous support of the club. Without them and organizations like them, events like this just wouldn't happen. I also want to recognize our bookstore partners, in addition to Bull Moose, where many of you secured your copy of this month's book, thanks to Bookstacks in Bucksport, None Such Books and More in South Portland, Mockingbird Bookshop in Bath, Sherman's Maine Coast Bookshops, DDG Booksellers in Farmington, Left Bank Books in Belfast, and Print in Portland. Now, also at each gathering, we randomly select book club members for generous prizes for winning subscriptions to AudioFile magazine. Congratulations this month to Barbara, Jeffrey, Gail, Emily, and Pam. And congratulations to Vicky for winning a subscription to Decor magazine. Now, if you have a question during tonight's conversation, you can send it over to us at fun@mainepublic.org, and I'll try to work it into the discussion. And with that, let's get started. Marpheen, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Bill. It's exciting to meet you again virtually.
Yes, well, it's a pleasure to meet you too and to have you on. As I said, this is a book that just utterly captivated me from the start, partially because I'm familiar with some of your stories, certainly not all of it, but it's just an amazing tale. It struck me as I started reading it and getting into the many layers of it that having an unusual life story is one thing. Putting it down in writing is another. And I'm curious as to when in that journey you decided to do this book. I think I read at some point that it had something to do with a speech that you gave. Is that right?
Yes, I think you probably wrote about it at one point, but when Governor LePage was trying to cut general assistance for asylum seekers in 2014, I had just been accepted into the Maine Law School, and I was invited to participate in the We Are Maine rally with Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition, Maine Equal Justice. And believe it or not, it was the first time I actually sat down and wrote my story, albeit it was a 5-minute speech, but my story from birth up until the age 21, 22. And the writing was great as an experience, but it was getting up on that stage, as nervous as I was, and sharing my story, but seeing this very, very diverse crowd in Monument Square, white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, American, all their eyes lighting up and connecting to different pieces of my story was really what told me, okay, maybe my story actually does have an impact, and maybe it can actually help spur some change. And that's back in 2014 was when I started writing more and more and more, and went back after that speech and wrote another 30 pages. And that's when it all started.
Mm. And I'll knock this off. A lot of people are curious about this, so I'll ask this as a follow-up right away. But Kate, as a reader, wrote us asking, can you share the thought behind the title "Moon in Full"? What's the significance of that?
Yeah, Moon in Fall. I really credit my editor, Genevieve Morgan, for helping to really brainstorm this title. But my name, Chann, last name Chann, Chann, it actually means moon in Cambodian as a name. And so we were just sort of sitting, texting back and forth with my editor, trying to figure out what is going to be a title that captures everything in this book. Because as you know, it has many twists and turns, many themes, many topics. And how can one title encapsulate all of those different things? And the moon just happened to be a very good symbol to use, whether it's the tides that the moon influences or the phases of the moon. the trajectory of the moon as it travels around the Earth. There were just so many connections and metaphors and analogies that you could make just using the moon. So that's what we did. And something that I remember saying at an event at USM was that the moon goes through its phases continually, but it's always fully itself. It's always fully the moon, no matter whether we see it in a crescent shape or whether it's part of an eclipse. The moon as a whole is still its full self. And so that really resonated with me, and that's really when it really clicked.
Yeah, it sure does. In fact, I looked at your website. I see you have what, 10 fun facts about the moon or something on there
Yeah.
that I really enjoyed. I'm going to use them as a trivia quiz with my grandsons. There's some good stuff in there. Uh, let's start at the beginning of your story. I was enthralled by your descriptions of your first years here in Maine when you were living in Portland. Uh, many people see the life of an immigrant family is challenging culturally, socially, economically. Yet, as a young boy, you seem to revel in much of that. And I'm wondering, as you look back on that, is it is it nostalgia, or is there or was it something more than that? Is there something about life in Portland during that time? I guess we're talking what, late 1990s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because you look back on it and you know how the perception of you as a young immigrant child from the outside looking in probably wasn't the same as how you viewed life from the inside looking out.
Yeah, I first want to start out with a new fact or new some new history I learned was that the reason why Portland was one of the few places that was attracting many Cambodian refugees and Cambodian families was because it was one of the few communities that had a small temple and had a mutual assistance association. I think it was called the United Cambodian Association back then. And so that was a new piece of history that I just learned, 2 months ago.
Hmm.
Was that Portland was so attractive. A lot of people say, "Oh, refugees and immigrants move here for different reasons," but for the Cambodian community, those were the two big reasons. There was already a growing community, and the reason why my grandmother moved here was because San Diego was a very different place in the early '90s, and Maine was just a lot safer. For a Portland kid who went to Reiki. I think I went to Baxter School before it closed as well. Um, Portland was in itself its own little big world. Um, Running around, we lived across from Portland High School next to the Boys and Girls Club, near the Salvation Army, as well as their store. And as a little kid, everything's big around you. And so those for a while, Portland High School, the Boys and Girls Club, Salvation Army was my world. And I remember experiencing the ice storm during that time.
Oh,
We hung out in our apartments with my grandmother, my mom, my siblings, my aunts and uncles, all of us packed into two apartments in that building. And you know, yes, it was nostalgic. Sleeping next to those little heaters that you can put on the floor, eating out of canned soup. Even though it was a hard time, we had each other. We had family, as I imagine many other Maine folks had during that time. But Reiki School, Baxter School, Portland schools in general, they were on the leading front in terms of how do you work with a multicultural student population. And so I remember participating in activities, plays, events, and art classes that it really incorporated a sense of egalitarianism, a sense of belonging, even though there were kids from Somalia, kids from Sudan, and kids from Cambodia and from other countries, we all existed in these spaces together. And so that was what it really felt like in Portland. Was it felt exciting, it felt vibrant. And as a kid growing up then, it's something I always remember with nostalgia, as you said, and it's something that I very much believe that I live out to this very day, the values that were instilled in me at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was out to Riverton, which was a much different, well, in many ways different. It's, geographically removed. And I guess that's, if you were ever going to become a juvenile delinquent, I guess that was the place with the famous junkyard incident and the things that
Yeah,
happened.
yeah.
But,
I tried to look it up to see if there was a news article about it.
uh-huh.
Um, but that story of us moving out to Riverton is, in many ways similar to many stories of how domestic violence, really kicks off. We were pretty comfortable living with my grandmother and my uncles and aunts, but I think that the boyfriend that my mom had at the time, he butted heads with my grandmother. And so, in a way, I wanted to isolate my mother from the influence of my grandmother. And so that was part of the reason why we moved out to Riverton. And that's when things kind of started to take a little bit of a tailspin. My mother was isolated, like I said, and experienced abuse in that isolation. And us as kids, we witnessed that. There's a pretty, I don't want to spoil that part for folks, but there's some pretty gruesome experiences there, and so I do want to give a trigger warning for folks
Mhm.
that take your time with the book. You don't have to
Mhm.
read it within a matter of days. Take your time with it because there is some heavy stuff in there.
Yeah.
Um, Riverton, I think being moved all the way out there was a tactic by the guy she was dating at the time. Um, Fortunately, Portland police got involved and he had a restraining order placed against him and disappeared. But after that, I feel like my mom sort of had a tailspin, more alcohol. Um, and so that left me as a 7, 8 year old kid, sort of on my own at times. I would take care of my little brothers and sisters, three of them, and learn how to cook. My mom taught me how to cook eggs and rice in case she wasn't going to be around. And what is a young boy going to do with all that time and
Yeah.
freedom on his? I made a lot of good friends, but I also got in a little bit of trouble. I think that the junkyard incident was one of those
Yeah.
times where we were swayed by an older middle school kid in the neighborhood. Of course, the one whose family ran the candy shop. So there was extra incentive for us to follow him around. But
Mhm.
the big thing for kids in Riverton Park, there's that big hill that goes up towards Forest Ave, was, we all had bikes, and the big rite of passage for kids, younger kids like us, was if we can bike all the way up that hill without stopping. And so we were promised if we go to this junkyard, we would find bike parts, and that is really what got us to that location. This middle school kid, older kid, found a bulldozer with some keys in it, and lo and behold, we were being chased by this bulldozer through the junkyard, and we got in trouble for it. Had
And
some
you lived in constant fear for a while, even when you
right.
moved away, that they were going to catch it. And they did actually uh,
They
kind of
did.
try. Yeah.
They were very
Yeah.
creative. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then things, that's when I guess you take your first big turn into the foster care system and a life that, it involves a lot of moving around. The one thing that has played a major role clearly in your life, on so many different levels, is religion.
Hmm.
And the Buddhism that you knew as a child, the evangelical Christianity into which you found yourself immersed at a pretty young age, even for that matter, the Hinduism that you witnessed during your trip to India. And as I read the book, I told you this when we spoke earlier, that the book, it's part of its narrative and part of it is philosophy, or your view of the world, the cosmos, whatever. And I was struck by how eloquently you talked about religion's effects on individuals as members of small communities, its effect on the intersection between religion and society as a whole. It felt like at times you keep religion at arm's length, yet at other times you're embracing it fully. And I'm wondering, with all of that back and forth, and a lot of it was you had to have religion in certain environments in which you were living. But I was curious, where has that left you spiritually? Because I look at your experiences, particularly with the Berries and the Assembly of God, and how you threw yourself into that. And I got to think that for all the contradictions, it had some kind of effect on you.
Yeah, I'm where I am is I'm a spiritualist. I believe that there are things that, until they can be explained by science, currently can't be explained. And so I think humans are naturally wired to fill in the gaps. I think the struggle was, how am I going to pay homage to both my Buddhist background and my Christian upbringing? And I think the path that I've found was, the universal idea of reciprocity, of loving your neighbor as yourself. And I think from Buddhism, I've garnered an understanding of their, the idea that they're suffering, and by accepting that, it's not just passive, it's accepting that so that you can then have agency, both in terms of how you respond to suffering, but also how you take action. And, that translates into a lot of the work I do now. From the
Mhm.
Christian, practices, I think that, as with many religions, prayer, meditation, sort of reflection, especially with church music, the piano and playing music combined with, praying and meditation really helped me to kind of find a way um, to have a salve over the, anger and the sadness that comes with traumatic transitions, like foster care and adoption, and being separated from your mother. And so I think that through that, I think my Buddhist beginnings in childhood really helped carry me to a point where, I can accept what's happened, um, and I can take the good from different parts of my life and find a way to move forward. And
Mhm.
so, it's not that I don't like religion. It's that um, religion can be used for nefarious purposes.
Right.
Many things that humans do can be turned for the wrong purposes. And so, for me, that's the biggest lesson through all of this is humans have many ways to find belonging, to find community, to build community and relationships with each other, so that we can cooperate, so that we can, work towards a common goal. But at the same time, those very same tools, those very same resources can be used for evil as well.
Yeah, they can be wielded as weapons, no question. We often have our authors do an excerpt, and this sounds like a great time for you to do one if you'd care to, uh, from the book. You have something chosen, I believe.
Yeah, if anyone happens to have the book open with them, page 206, starting with the second paragraph. I do believe we're in a period of paradigmatic shift wherein there are universal principles and rights that transcend borders, countries, cultures, and yes, religions. Where once we looked to and created gods and demons and great beings to guide and channel human behavior toward cooperation and unity, we have begun to look within ourselves to find that common thread that ties us to each other and pulls us together. And from that deep wellspring of human longing for dignity and equality, we have established such things as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, forms for diplomacy, and the social contract. I would posit that instead of various deities creating us in their own image, we have created deities instead in our own image. Think back to the ancient Greek gods, Ares, the god of war, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Dionysius, the god of wine. The gods reflected back to us our hopes, our fears, our virtues, and our vices. As our capacity for understanding and knowledge has evolved and expanded, we have begun to look less and less to the heavens for hope, deliverance, justice, and retribution, and have begun to peer into each other and ourselves to draw out such things as the rule of law and institutions that are created in our image, imbued with that sense of human hope and optimism. These things that we have built in our aspirational declarations serve as that constant reminder, a mirror, if you will, that reflects what it is that we long and hope for. This is what drives me, this optimism for the future of humanity, my optimism as well as my experiences growing up, my longing to understand the root causes of suffering and the human condition have softened my heart and tempered my soul. And thus my bent is toward trying to listen to what people are saying, those moments when they open up about their upbringing, their families, and their lives, in an effort to understand their motives and their worldview. Bringing people together requires humility, empathy, and a willingness to pay attention. When you get to the root of someone's worldview and belief systems and the life circumstances and experiences that frame those things, you can better connect with that person. Keeping the peace and maintaining boundaries on how and what you talk about with others will also bear fruit. I have found that it's only by being with others and showing them that I am human and no different from any other person, regardless of my sexuality or beliefs or lifestyle, that I can challenge the stereotypes and stigmas and beliefs they may have about LGBTQ plus people. To steal some language I learned in the evangelical world, I have to be the light that shows them a different path, a different way of viewing the world and other people. As Katy Perry so poignantly put it, baby, you're a firework. Come on, show them what you're worth. Regardless of my sexual orientation, I am a human being deserving of basic dignity and respect. And changing hearts and minds requires, again, humility, empathy, and understanding. It requires that we maintain our optimism about other people and their ability to evolve and change. It means not giving up hope that they may one day have a change of heart. It means appealing to that deep human longing for dignity and equality that echoes in each of us, that childlike innocence, openness, and inclination to embrace the unknown.
Words to live by. Your sexual orientation, as you mentioned in that excerpt, is the other through line, I think, through this story. And it starts with when you're an 8-year-old boy and you impulsively kissed another boy. And for so long you believed, again, based on religion, that identifying as a gay male was your secret sin, that you had to bear. And even when you came out finally with your adoptive family, the reaction was, "You're wrong. You're just confused. Just that don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It'll go away." I wonder if you could talk a little bit about living that struggle in such a, I don't know, such a crazy world. I mean, where what you're living is so diametrically opposed to what you're feeling, and facing a challenge that I think a lot of young people experience, sometimes with really painful and sometimes even tragic results. I mean, you persevered through this, and it struck me, particularly at the younger ages, when you were really convinced that this was your problem. This was not who you were. This was something that it was kind of inflicted on you. Uh, it just seemed like a monumental struggle for you. And I'm wondering, how did you get up? How did you go to school in the morning? How did you go to church on the weekend without just wanting, without just wanting to explode?
You know, again, I think that there were practices, there were different things that were good about religion, that helped, to some extent. Um, you know, so it's hard to oftentimes explain that something can be both, be good and be so bad at the same time.
Mhm.
Because I think we're so used to thinking in a binary way. But I think many people actually, if they think about it, they have some experiences that it's bittersweet or it's both good and bad. Um, but living, having moved through foster care, having moved through transitions in home, finally arriving in a home and being adopted as a kid, you know, there was a sense that, oh, I need to show my gratitude. I need to
Mhm.
show my parents, my adoptive parents, that I love them, and that I'm thankful that they took us out of a bad situation, which was me and my sister Tanya's third foster home. And so within all that, there's a confusion of, how do you show gratitude, when uh, what you're being told, whether that's through subliminal messaging or outright, full sermons on anti-gay full sermons. But the messages I got was, this is not okay. Homosexuality is a sin. It's an abomination. It's against the quote unquote natural order of things as God has ordained them. And for me, uh, I had to bury, those urges, those attractions deep, deep, deep down, and had to really hide myself in a dark place, even though in the church it's sort of, we're supposed to be basking in the light, praying and worshiping together in this happy community. um I was really in a dark place, and I felt I had to do all of these things to prove to my parents that I was grateful, to prove to my parents that, I'm saved and I'm a good Christian boy. And one of the things that really, really led to me having panic attacks and having anxiety about this quote unquote sin of being gay was, the story in Revelations, the end times, and the rapture, which is big in the Pentecostal evangelical world, is someday, Christ will come back and the flock of Christians, born again Christians, will be taken up. Um, I was afraid that, if Christ came back, that everyone else would be raptured, my family, except for me, because I harbored what they considered a sin. I knew I was gay and I was attracted to other guys. And so imagine that feeling for a kid who went through foster care in different homes, of being left behind, and the message being told to you is, oh, to not be left behind, then you need to, do all of these different things, and um, and believe all of these different things. And so that really drove that anxiety, those panic attacks, in the middle of the night, sleep paralysis. My bedroom was in the basement next to the laundry room, and the dreams that I would have at that time, was I'd wake up in my dream and would feel like there was a dark presence around the corner. It was an L-shaped room. And so in my dream, I would wake up and I would be so scared. I'd jump up to go turn on the light, and I'd try to flip on the light switch, but the light wouldn't turn on. And so that was sort of like a nightmare that was a result of all that anxiety and pressure that was building up. And
Oh, my goodness.
so that was how dark it felt, having to hide myself. And when I graduated high school, went off to Bible college, I really had to wrestle with the belief system, with that worldview that I thought was the right one, and
Mhm.
eventually had to break free.
In retrospect, when when you went off to college, and I look back on that period for you, and it's almost as if when you left Maine to go to Pennsylvania, the clock started ticking, or it's like the timer started ticking, and removed from the day-to-day influences under which you were growing up, it seemed inevitable that you weren't going to be able to, kind of keep that cork in the bottle
Yeah.
indefinitely. So you made it. I think you made it to February, right before finally, ba-boom. The moment that I think we'd all been waiting for as we
Yeah.
read the story. It's like, okay, it's coming, when and how. But as you look back on it, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? That you had a bigger share you were more independent. You had more ability to think and spend time by yourself. So was there an inevitability to that? Do you think that once you got off on your own, that would happen?
I think so, and if I still believed in fate and providence, I would have, joked that, maybe God just is okay with people being gay, and led me down that path. But I think that it was inevitable. You know, Even though I was at a Bible college, the, I was still, I had a crush on the soccer team captain. So every time I would go to the dining hall or to music class, or walking around campus, sort of seeing him kind of like, you know, had butterflies in my stomach, and I felt a lot of shame for having those butterflies, those feelings. And so it was little things like that, that I thought that being at a Bible college, being surrounded again, would help insulate me from those things. And it really impressed upon me that no matter where I go, I'm gonna have this, at the time, this quote unquote thorn in my side, like, what Apostle Paul mentions in the Bible,
Mhm,
and that I needed to find a way to deal with this thorn in my side.
mhm,
Um, what really sort of led the way was, I don't think he intended it, but a Christian theologian professor, um, sort of challenged a lot of the mainstream thinking in Christian thought, and dug into sort of different symbolisms and different things. I remember he had a whole class on the movie Twister and how that had a lot of, symbolism in it. But my paper I did on the Trinity, which led me down this path of digging up um, Greek philosophy, um, and I stumbled upon the History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. And there I had someone who laid out the progression of, classical philosophy and the Greek gods, and how a lot of the religions at the time were sort of borrowing from each other, and that Christianity was the ultimate religion that borrowed from many different religions, Zoroastrianism from the Egyptians, from the Greeks. And that was when I was sort of like, wait, so, the idea of Jesus and virgin birth wasn't original. It was based on an Egyptian myth. And then, the cup of wine, Christ being associated with wine, and wine being associated with the blood, the god Dionysius, the god of wine and blood. Um, and so that was really what started chipping away at the belief system. And finally, in that winter that I spent, I joke it was my winter at Valley Forge, even though the college wasn't. It was called Valley Forge College,
yeah, yeah.
Christian college, but it wasn't at Valley Forge. But nonetheless, my winter at Valley Forge, you know, really struggled. Um, Stayed on campus, isolated myself, stared at the ceilings at night, went for walks in the snow, and really did that tough reflecting and, echoing those thoughts and those arguments. If God is love, then how can he be so against,
Mhm.
the love that I could feel for another man?
Yeah.
And,
Mm.
that was really what led into the spring when a Christian LGBT group visited campus and protested. And I, for the first time, saw, Christian LGBTQ folks, which I wouldn't have expected to see. Um, and that's ultimately what led me to come out later that summer.
So there's a certain permission there in a way
Yeah.
that offered you here. And then you picked up the phone and then word spread, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a way that you wish it hadn't happened. But once that word is out, word is out. And I'm going to go to an audience member here because who had a question that I had too, and that is that as you tell this story, uh, you're very candid about reactions uh,
Hmm.
in, in your adoptive family, among various friends, and these are real people. These are people who are in your world as we speak. So the audience member asked, "What does your adopted family think of Moon in Full and your various struggles to find acceptance?" And I would add to that. Well, I would add to that. How did you handle that in terms of the book? Because you were going to be revealing things that are personal, not only to you, but personal to other people. Did you, you know, sit down with them and say, here's what I'm going to say? Or did you just kind of close your eyes and hit send or something in between?
So I didn't ask for permission to tell various stories. I think that, and this was a discussion I had with my editor, um, if it's from your point of view, then it's your narrative, it's the way you perceive things. And you don't really have to ask for permission to tell the story as you see it. Um, I gave them a copy of the advanced read, I believe, or a copy of the books,
By them, you
and
mean,
my adopted parents.
okay,
uh,
okay. Mhm.
and my biological grandmother and mother also got copies, but my adoptive parents, uh, they did read the book, and they have yet to say really anything about it. I think the only thing that my adoptive mom said was, "Oh, you didn't ask permission to use the photos, some of the photos." So I took that as a good sign. Like, oh, is if that's the only comment you have about the book, then that's good. But I feel like the book has actually, you know, had a good impact on our relationship because in many ways it is kind of like a letter to them and to my foster parents and also to my Cambodian parents. But it's very much a letter sharing my perspective of what I
Yeah.
experienced.
Mhm.
And I think that we have found a middle path to, not just tolerate, but sort of um, make space for each other to still be a family. And I think that ultimately that is one of the big takeaways I want people to have is we can have disagreements, we can have different religious beliefs, as long as we're not being overtly harmful with those beliefs, um, then I think that there's a way for us to have boundaries, but all to coexist and to continue being a family. And in today's world, as divided as we are and polarized as we are, you know, I I I appreciate my upbringing in the church and in Republican politics because it's given me content so that I can actually have a conversation with a Republican and a conservative, albeit some of them are a little bit unhinged on the far right. But, there are still reasonable Republicans who will have a beer or talk to you over coffee. And I think that's what we're losing in society is we can't even bother talking to people who might disagree with us. And I
Yeah,
think
we
the
talk
big fear is
past each other. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think the big fear is that maybe we're a little scared that our minds might change if we open ourselves up. So
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I just picture you after you gave the book to them, it must have been a difficult time for you. It's like when you give like a term paper, whatever it might be, when you're waiting for someone to react to something as personal as writing, which is in this case a deeply personal experience. I got to think you were sweating bullets.
well, my grandma Anita was also there when I gave her a copy at the same time, and to see her eyes light up, and the pride that she had in me as a grandkid, um sort of her reaction overtook everything else. So um
God bless the grandmothers, right?
yeah, they're the best.
What would we do without them? I'm going to go to another reader question. Which really kind of widens the lens beyond what we were saying about Portland, during your early childhood. This audience member asked, the author goes on multiple journeys, it seems. What truths have you found in Maine that you hadn't expected?
I think one of the things, I don't know if I actually wrote this in the book or whether it was a reflection in a talk later, but everywhere I go, I judge the state, I judge the city, I judge the location based on how their water or their trees or their terrains and measure up to Maine. And when I was in Pennsylvania, I used to talk smack about the rivers being too brown. When I visit my sister and my nephews in Texas, you know, the lack of trees and the the immense heat. And so even though Maine is small and I do enjoy some travel, I think one of the big truths is that we have a pretty amazing state. The trees and the greenery and the rivers and the clean water that we have, and this is coming from someone who grew up near Sebago Lake. Um, one of my uh irrational fears is swimming in water with too many leaves on the bottom. But Sebago Lake and the beaches, you can see the sand, you can see to the bottom. And so everywhere else I go, I remember the truth that Maine is a pretty exceptional place. Um, and the other truth in that, hidden in that, is that nature, which I've had to relearn, post pandemic, is that nature is such a soothing partner to have. When you're dealing with a pandemic or you're dealing with loss or grief. As you mentioned, there was someone that passed away this week. Um, Maine is not only exceptional in that it has a great environment and natural resources, but those natural resources are a way to find time to reflect and time to be alone, or with someone significant, a significant other, and to find other truths just by communing with the earth. And I think our indigenous, um, the Wabanaki, I've made a number of Wabanaki friends over the years, and just the tremendous wisdom that they have about the lands and how to view the land differently, and the trees and the water and how everything is reconnected. I think those are the truths hidden right here in Maine.
Yeah, yeah. Another audience question. I am so concerned if Marpheen has found some degree of peace and happiness today. How are things going now? This reminds me of Sheila, when you reconnected with Sheila and she asked you that kind of stop you in your tracks question, are you happy? And so much of your life, outwardly you were happy, inwardly you were struggling. Uh, how goes it now?
I think happiness isn't a static state that you can, find yourself in. I think this might sound very Buddhist of me, but accepting all of that life is, its ups and downs, the happiness, the sadness, the joys, and the despair even. I think that, you can only know what's happy or what's joyful by knowing its opposite. I don't know what philosopher said that, but I think overall I'm happy and I shall say I'm content. Content with life in the sense that I've reached this point. I've had many opportunities that still befuddle me. In the book I wrote about ending up at the Blaine House for a Pride reception. You know, rubbing shoulders with, state legislators and now a journalist,
Mhm.
Bill Nemitz, but also in our mutual friend Greg Kesich, getting to know him over the years. And
Mhm.
I just keep wondering, how did I end up here?
Yeah.
How did I get to this point? And there are moments where I just stop in my tracks and appreciate and take and have a moment of gratitude. I think and take in for a moment, maybe this approach that I've taken in life of trying to reconcile, trying to find peace and work for the betterment of others, even at a small scale like local politics in Maine. I think that, you know, you meet a lot of human beings and you get into a lot of messes and conflicts. But when there's good that comes out of it, when there's a deal that's struck, when um, something gets, passed, I think that um, the hope that I have in humanity as a whole is renewed time and time
Mhm.
again. And
Yeah.
so I
Well,
think that's
you
what
sell
makes
you you undersell yourself. I mean, you remember the Portland Charter Commission, remember the Planning Board in
I
Portland.
try not to. No, I'm kidding.
You're on a bunch of boards. As I look at your resume now, I think back to this little kid running around Reiki school, and I'm thinking, boy, you talk about having an impact on your community. And you're 33 years old. So which leads to one of my last questions, and that is, what's next? I mean, several people wanted to know, is this? I hope it's not a one-off. It's a memoir, but do you plan on keeping on writing?
Some people, say there's a big cliffhanger at the end of the book. And my thought has not been to pick up where that cliffhanger left off,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I do have it in the works to finally visit Cambodia. I've never been to Cambodia.
I had that question for you. I was glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that is a book right there.
Yeah. Well, you stole
Um,
my ending, Marpheen, because as I was reading it when we spoke the other day, and I was
yeah,
almost done with the book, and I
yep,
was all cocky. I said, "Oh, I know how this is going to end." And you probably laughed because I said, "You're going to meet your mother." You know,
yeah,
You can't fool me. Well, which you did, and
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
in all of her frailties and all of her love for you
yeah,
and her vulnerability still showing through. And I thought, okay, well, that's it. And then boom, you
yeah,
in out of nowhere walks your father.
yeah,
Uh, it's only about 2 pages, that
yeah,
whole anecdote,
yeah.
and sits down with his tro. Is that how you print the instrument?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Uh, and starts to play through his tears with no words spoken,
yeah.
and it knocked me out of my chair. I was just absolutely both surprised and it just tore at my heart. Uh, Tell us about that moment. I mean, when I used to write columns, I'd say, oh, there's my lead or there's my ending, for the column. You weren't writing the book then, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, that sounds to me like just an incredibly powerful moment for you.
Oh, it was, and the reason why I'm a spiritual person is because I don't think science can explain this in that, in middle school, I mean, actually in Riverton and Reiki, I like to be part of the student choir, and then in middle school and high school, took piano, learned guitar, and got into music. And um, to be surprised by my father, who had not seen since I was a very, very like a baby, a toddler, probably two years old, maybe. Um, for him to walk in and the first thing for him to do is just to sit down and play. Um, for me, uh, such a spiritual moment, a moment that can't be explained
Mhm.
by science. That why did he pick music to play, and how would he even know that I would appreciate the symbolism of it, and how it connected to the musical part of me. And so for me, it really was speechless. I would just
Mm.
say I was speechless. And
As was I reading it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, it was just a great moment. Hey, before we do sign off, I wanted to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about another project you're involved with, Maine, and which seems to be gaining quite a bit of momentum. I understand you're the executive director of the organization. Is that right? And
yes,
tell
I'm
us
the executive
about that and
director.
what you're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, executive director of Maine. Back in 2018, I was looking for a better way to reconnect with my roots, with my heritage. And I didn't see a civic organization of any kind. And so the first thought was, let's just start one, um, which was a big learning lesson in itself. I didn't know the language. I still, I can understand bits and pieces, but to sort of stick my neck out and try to find community members to also join in, um, what was a big leap of faith, I guess, in the community. And through that, learned many lessons again, about leadership, about how to build community. But me and the board, and our community members and volunteers have really built one of Maine's sort of uh, organizations, that serve the Cambodian community. And so for me, um, the Asian American Community Center project that we're working on in Westbrook, um, is my way of sharing sort of the prosperity we've had in terms of being able to garner public attention, public awareness of the Cambodian community, the issues that we care about, being able to go and invite the Secretary of State or the governor or the public officials to our events. The Asian American Community Center is again a big part of my being. Is how do you broaden, or share in the success that you have. And so, to help other Asian American and Pacific Island communities also, build up awareness and build up, their communities is part of what I want to do. And a community center, Asian American Community Center, is going to be a physical space that can bring us all together and have big events, have classroom space. And so we've got to raise about $4 to $5 million for that, which, is definitely achievable. And so, that really, is a part of who I am, as I'm sure you've gotten from the book. Is how do we climb, the ladder together? It's not just about one person. It's not just about one community. It's how do we all sort of, ride that rising tide together.
Mm. That's great. Is there a website people can go to find out more about that?
Yes, khmermaine.org, KHMER Maine.org.
Okay.
And you can find there's a link to the Asian American Community Center page as well.
Excellent. Well, it's a great project, and good luck with that. I wish we could talk all night. I feel like we've just scratched the surface here, but we have reached our end time, and I just want to thank you, Marpheen, for spending the time with us, and more importantly, thank you for telling Maine your story, because
Thank you for having me.
We need more stories like this, and I think you are proof positive that with the right mixture of courage, perseverance, and faith, good things happen. So good luck to you going forward. I have a feeling that we're going to have more conversations going forward, and I look forward to them. Thanks for
You
joining
got my
us.
number now, so.
Okay. Okay. Thanks again, Marpheen. It's been a pleasure. Really has. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. A final shout out to Bull Moose and Coffee by Design for sponsoring tonight's event. Our next book club meeting is next month. We are keeping a rapid pace here this year. In July, we're going to be taking on Home Now, How 6,000 Refugees Transformed an American Town. This is a story about Lewiston by Cynthia C.B. Anderson, who will be joining us next month. In the meantime, keep cool. Have a happy summer, beginning of summer, and have a great rest of your night. Thanks for joining us.